The night of April 22, 1945, falls over the plains west of Seelow like a curtain of ash. Just hours before, this ground was a storm of steel and fire. Now, it's still hot in places where shells churned it into boiling mud. The air hangs thick with the sour, acrid smell of burned rubber and ruptured fuel tanks. Through this haze, Soviet infantry march forward. Their boots sink into the soft, black soil, each step a testament to their relentless advance. Their silhouettes flicker in the eerie glow of burning vehicles. Tanks lie on their sides like gutted animals, their metal hides twisted and torn. Trucks are still smoldering, their cargo reduced to cinders. Field guns, once instruments of death, have melted into shapeless, grotesque sculptures of iron. Ahead of them, a dull red smudge paints the horizon. It is no sunrise, it is Berlin burning. Colonel Ivan Gorshkov of the 8th Guards Army trudges alongside his men. The worn leather of his shoulder holster bounces rhythmically against his heavy coat. He isn't just listening to the sounds of his marching army, he's listening to the distant percussion of German artillery. The sounds are quick, sharp, irregular. These are not the organized barrages of a confident army. This is desperation fire, the last gasps of a dying beast. His adjutant, a young captain with cracked glasses and a face smeared with grime, hands him an updated map. The colonel studies it in the dim, flickering light cast by a ruined farmhouse, its rafters still alight with stubborn flames. Civilians are fleeing the eastern districts, the captain says quietly, his voice raspy from smoke and exhaustion. Columns on every road. Gorshkov nods slowly. He had expected this. Berlin was not simply a military objective. It was a city imploding under the weight of hunger, fear, and years of suffocating propaganda. Every meter the Red Army advanced meant more terrified civilians caught in the deadly vice between retreating German units and the unstoppable Soviet push. A T-30 for tank rumbles up beside the marching column, its engine coughing black smoke into the already polluted air. The commander, Senior Lieutenant Yuri Kalinin, pushes open the heavy hatch and shouts down to the infantry below. Road ahead is clear to Emmensburg. Mine's cleared by our sappers. He grins, a tired, crooked smile. It is the smile of a man who has lost too many comrades to celebrate anything too loudly. A few of the infantry cheer, but it's half-hearted, born more of weary relief than triumphant joy. The long road to Berlin had already claimed so many. The road west twists through a landscape of shattered villages. It's a surreal, silent testament to the war's fury. Roofs are gone from most houses, their skeletal frames open to the sky. Some walls tilt inward, as though bowing to the inevitable force that had swept through. At a crossroads, a lone German 20mm flak gun lies overturned, its barrel pointing uselessly at the muddy ground. Its crew is scattered nearby, their field grey uniforms torn and stained. A Soviet medic, his own face a mask of fatigue, kneels beside one of the young German soldiers. With a gentle, almost tender motion, he closes the dead man's eyes. No one speaks. The moment hangs heavy in the air, a silent acknowledgement of a shared, brutal humanity. This late in the war, the fighting had changed. It was no longer about clean lines on a map or grand strategic maneuvers. It had become a slow-motion collapse, a desperate and chaotic struggle for every street, every building. Occasionally, a single shot cracks from a distant attic window, a lone Volksturm boy, armed with more fear than training, making a final, futile stand. But these isolated shots are quickly silenced by a burst of return fire. The resistance is sporadic, but it's a constant reminder that even a cornered animal will bite. By midday, the Soviet spearheads hit their first pocket of real, organized resistance. A battle-hardened SS battalion, grimly reinforced with Hitler Youth units, some just boys, has barricaded the narrow center of a small town. They've used overturned trolleys, sandbags piled high, and 2 immobilized Panther tanks, now serving as formidable stationary gun nests. There were suddenly smells of brick dust and wet smoke as the first Soviet scouts creep forward, rifles raised, sensors on high alert. The world explodes. Machine gun fire erupts from a second-floor window, the rounds snapping past their heads like angry insects. A Soviet sergeant, bellowing orders, drags a wounded man behind the relative safety of a stone fountain, shouting for smoke cover. The T-34s, the iron fist of the assault, advance cautiously, angling their armor to minimize exposure to enemy fire. Their 85mm guns fire point blank into the disabled Panthers. The impact sends geysers of stone, debris, and steel skyward. The shockwave is a physical blow, rattling every rib and shaking the very foundations of the buildings. Inside the crumbling houses, fanatical German teenagers fire Panzerfausts from darkened stairwells. Their young faces are streaked with soot and tears, a terrifying mix of indoctrinated fury and childhood fear. One of the anti-tank rockets detonates against a T-30 for his side armor. The explosion is deafening, blowing the track clean off and hurling the tank's commander backward into the turret wall, his body limp. Lieutenant Kalinin, seeing his comrade's tank disabled, climbs from his own T-34. He's exposed, a target, but he waves his crew forward, shouting over the din of battle, "Flank left, pin them in the square, don't let them escape." The battle dissolves into brutal, intimate, room-to-room combat. Grenades are rolled down staircases, their explosions muffled by the thick stone walls. Doors splinter under heavy rifle butts. Soviet submachine gunners, their PPSH-41s chattering like jackhammers, clear hallways in smoky, violent bursts of lead. This is the ugliest face of war, fought not for territory but for survival, meter by bloody meter. A fire catches in the bakery on the corner of the square. It spreads quickly through the old wooden beams until bright orange flames spill from the roof in a roaring cascade, adding a hellish light to the afternoon slaughter. By late afternoon, the German pocket collapses. The resistance breaks. The survivors, mostly dazed boys in oversized uniforms that hang off their thin frames, stumble out into the square with their hands raised. One boy, no older than 13, clutches a small canvas satchel. It's decorated with a crude, hand-sewn red armband. A veteran Soviet soldier, his face hardened by 4 years of war, approaches him. He takes the Panzerfaust from the boy's trembling hands and then, in a gesture of unexpected compassion, gently pats his shoulder. There is nothing about this moment that feels like victory. It feels like a tragedy. With the town secured, the Soviet columns regroup. The brief lull in the fighting is a chance to catch their breath. Tanks refuel from trucks that smell sharply of gasoline, the fumes mixing with the smoke in the air. Infantrymen huddle together, heating tins of American-supplied stew over fires made from burning crates. The wind shifts and now it blows directly from the east, from Berlin. It carries the smoke of the dying city into their faces. It tastes of plaster, of charred wood, and of something darker, something unspeakable, the smell of the death of a city. A message crackles over the radio, laced with static but its urgency cutting through the noise. Front headquarters reports breakthroughs along the southern axis. The ring around Berlin is closing. Colonel Gorshkov pulls on his gloves, his movements deliberate. His eyes are fixed on that fiery skyline in the distance. Every soldier here feels it. It's not the pull of glory or conquest. It's the pull of history. The end of the war, the very end of this for your nightmare, is somewhere inside that inferno. But they all know it is also where they will face the worst fighting any of them have ever seen. The road to Berlin is now open. But entering a dying empire is never a simple march. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to light. April 21st, 1945. The Seelow Heights, a grey swell of earth and shattered trees 40 miles east of Berlin. Dawn arrives with a taste of metal and powder. You stand ankle deep in churned mud behind a Soviet trench, the world compressed to the rasp of distant artillery and the soft, sickly cough of shell fragments. A cold wind drags the smoke of the previous night's bombardment across the plain. Men around you are wrapped in patched greatcoats, their faces rimed white where condensation froze overnight. On a muddy strip of canvas, a lieutenant, thin and with his jaw clenched, checks the underside of a T-30 for his track, as if by touch he might make the machine invulnerable. Above him, a dark, cylindrical-shaped docks with the horizon, the silhouette of a Katyusha launcher, its crew of sergeants moving with practiced silence, their eyes like chipped flint. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's orders are the thunder behind everything. The first Belo-Russian front is massed, infantry stacked in shallow foxholes, sappers with bundled satchel charges, and whole columns of T-30 for 85s, idling their diesels, grills, coughing steam into the cold. Men call them tanks, but they are muffled beasts with names only in Private Misha, Boris Enya. A captain with a bleeding knuckle stares at his map by the light of his cigarette. His breath makes small ghosts that vanish. The radio operator next to him tunes to a staccato that will later be translated into inevitability, massed artillery, then infantry to exploit the cracks. At 5:30, the artillery begins. It is not a measured announcement, but a deluge, thousands of tubes firing at once. The earth itself seems to convulse as waves of high explosive and shrapnel tear the skyline to tatters. The first rockets from the Katyushas scream overhead and explode like a ring of skyfire across the German forward positions. The sound is a physical thing, a pressure that bends the ribs and rattles teeth. Men who have tasted shelling before whisper old superstitions. Those who haven't grab at one another as if to stay human. The smell is a thick, iron breath cordite and baked metal, mingled with the lingering copper of spilled blood. Across the devastated no man's land, the German positions are a constellation of shattered bunkers, half-standing hedgerows, and the skeletal forms of any tank emplacements. Helmuth Wedling, a general worn thin by orders from a crumbling F bunker and by the wide, impossible responsibility of defending a capital, watches reports from a command post carved into the hull of a ruined manor. His adjutants hand him telegrams and maps with gloved, trembling hands. His eyes flick from one to another and land on a field report. Zhukhov's weight is unbearable. The German infantry, the remnants of the 9th Army and assorted Volkssturm units are underfed, underarmed and exhausted, but they fight with a private, animal ferocity. From slit trenches, a machine gunner fires a ragged cone of lead that cracks the air and finds a Soviet loader's shoulder. The Soviet man slumps. His comrades drag him into cover, cursed words mixing with the artillery din. The first armoured thrust comes with a coordination that feels choreographed. T-34 columns roll forward, their silhouettes low, periscopes twitching like the eyes of predators. Behind them, infantry in small squads cling to hull sides or follow in waves, rifle muzzles polished to a faint sheen. A platoon sergeant, his moustache frosted with hoarfrost, barks orders in a voice that cuts through the thunder. Sappers leap out and quickly set up Bangalore torpedoes to clear any tank obstacles. The first anti-tank guns flare. Their crews steel-helmeted faces gaunt line-up shells with hands that do not tremble, though their knees might. Where the Soviet tanks meet the German anti-tank line, the world narrows to metal and flame. An 88mm gun speaks with a voice of finality, slamming into a T-30 for his flank and overturning it in a sheet of flame. Its crew ejects in a spray of sparks and mud, disappearing into the smoke like ghosts. Another T-34, undeterred, slams its turret forward, ramming a Panther and then backing away, steel grinding like teeth. Men yell Russian curses, German prayers, and the language of survival takes over. Yet it is not only steel. The Soviet Air Force, IL-2 Sturmovik attack planes, sweep low, their bombs, and cannons turning hedgerows into a new landscape of craters and bodies. The Stukas that remain on the German side shriek too, but there are fewer and their raids are erratic. The Luftwaffe is a shadow of what it had been. Civilians, women with children, and a handful of elderly men hunch in cellars of ruined farms, listening to the world fall apart above them. A woman hums a prayer under her breath while a toddler, wide-eyed and filthy, clutches a stuffed toy with one eye missing. The city of Berlin is not yet close enough to smell, but over the horizon, the promise of it, or the end of it, hangs like a dark fruit. In the Soviet command posts, there is a strange mix of grim resignation and iron-determined optimism. Zhukov's staff speak of encirclement, of cutting the city's arteries, and of using the monstrous weight of men and metal to make the German resistance a simple arithmetic of collapse. They are aware, in private, of the cost. Reports of casualties come in like a slow, dreadful trickle. Still, when a forward radio crackles that a breach has been made in the German line, a young lieutenant presses his palm to the cold radio and smiles, incredulous. By mid-afternoon, the Seelow Heights have become a crucible. Trenches are filled with smoke and the dead. Tank hulks lace the landscape like the bones of beasts, and the surviving units on both sides stagger toward whatever orders and courage remain. The topography rises and shallow hollows become the arbiters of life and death. Above all of it, the sky is a hard, pale blue, indifferent to human calculation. The advance will not end at Seelow. Berlin waits like a closed mouth beyond the plain. For now, the mechanics of victory are being forged in mud and blood, the grinding of gears, the ratchet of bayonet and bolt, the precise, terrifying mathematics of artillery and will. You feel it deep in your teeth, the knowledge that a city, a regime, entire lines of command, and the fate of millions hinge on the hours being burned away on this slope. And in that cold, raw fact, men move forward because they are ordered, because they must. And because they hope in the last thin way humans can hope that what they do will mean that the killing will end. April 24, 1945, the outskirts of Berlin a labyrinth of rubble, smoke, and frightened silence. A pale morning light struggles through a sky the color of dirty cotton. The city doesn't look like a place where people once lived. It looks like a carcass hollowed out, still steaming from the blows of artillery. Streets that once held trams and market stalls are now trenches filled with brick dust. Apartment blocks sag inward like broken ribs. Major Alexander Vasiliev of the 3rd Shock Army peers through his field glasses at the sprawl ahead. Beyond the shattered tree line lies the northeastern edge of Berlin-Weißensee, then the long, battered avenues leading toward Alexanderplatz. His uniform smells of mud, cordite, and 3 days without sleep. He lowers the lenses and wipes them on his sleeve as his battalion gathers around a wrecked bus half buried in rubble. "Listen," he says, "German lines here are collapsing, but cornered animals fight hardest." No assumptions, a distant crescendo of explosions rolls through the city, echoing between stone canyons. Somewhere deep inside Berlin, someone is still fighting for streets that no longer exist on any map. The Soviet encirclement is almost complete. To the north, Rokossovsky's second Belo-Russian front presses downward. To the south, Konev's first Ukrainian front claws upward toward the suburbs. Berlin is being squeezed like a vice one that tightens with every hour. But encirclement is not triumph. It is a warning. Vasiliev's battalion moves into Weißensee cautiously, threading between overturned trams and bombed-out storefronts. PPSH gunners advance in pairs, watching windows, doorways, shadows. Tanks follow slowly, their treads grinding over broken pavement with the sound of distant thunder. A child's bicycle lies crushed under the front of a collapsed kiosk. Across the street, a poster of Hitler half-burned, eyes scraped away, flaps weakly in the wind. Inside a ruined tenement, civilians huddle in cellars lit by candles. An elderly woman sits with her back against the wall, clutching a rosary that trembles in her fingers. A Soviet medic, helmet pushed back, kneels beside her and offers a tin cup of water. She nods but does not speak. Her eyes are red from dust and grief. Up above, a sniper's shot cracks from a top floor window. The bullet smashes into a brick 10 meters from Vasiliev's head. Soviet infantry dive behind a knocked-over wardrobe lying in the street. 2 machine gunners drag their DP-27 into position and fire in short bursts. Brick, wood, and plaster erupt from the sniper's perch. Minutes later, a lifeless figure slips from the shattered window and falls silently to the street below. Progress is measured in meters now. Every intersection is a battlefield. Every building is a fortress. By noon, the Red Army reaches the Ringbahn, the circular railway that girds the city. Beyond it lies the heart of Berlin, where the last defenders' SS units, naval troops, police forces, Hitler youth are digging in around government buildings. But the encirclement still has one stubborn gap: the Spree River crossings to the west. Vasiliev's orders shift. His battalion is to push south to seal the ring completely, preventing any breakout or reinforcement by the remnants of the 9th Army. The fighting intensifies as they approach the riverbanks. At the Friedrichshain district, they encounter organized German resistance-weary Wehrmacht veterans led by a calm, tight-voiced captain who directs machine gun fire with a kind of doomed precision. His men fight from sandbag nests behind uprooted trees. They know the end is certain, but precision is the final dignity they can cling to. A Soviet flamethrower team advances, each step deliberate. When the flame arcs forward, washing over the barricades in a rolling wave of orange, the heat radiates across the entire street. German soldiers stumble out, coughing, weapons dropped. Some surrender with shaking hands. Others simply collapse. Still, it is not enough to stop the German counterattacks. Near a bombed-out playground, 3 Panthers rumble from behind a ruined schoolhouse, their guns swinging toward the Soviet infantry. A T-30 for crew curses and reverses behind a shell crater, armor ringing with the impact of a glancing 75mm shot. Target left. Fire! Karlinen shouts from the turret. The T-30 for his gun barks, kicking back with a metallic thump. The shell slams into the Panther's side armor and sends shrapnel spraying into the street. Smoke pours from its hatches. Within minutes, the last crossing is cut. The ring is closed. Berlin, the once proud capital of a regime that sought to reshape the world, is sealed shut, trapped under a storm of steel. Inside the city, food is nearly gone. Ammunition is scarce. Civilians clutch what little they have and pray for a way out that does not exist. And in the upper bunker, beneath the ruined Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler receives the news with a trembling hand and a silence that no one present dares break. The final battle is no longer approaching. It has begun. April 27, 1945. Berlin is no longer a city. It's a maze of fire, dust, and collapsing stone, a scene straight out of a nightmare. Above, the sky is a low, oppressive ceiling of smoke, pressed down by the unending crash of artillery. The once grand buildings of the German capital now lean like tired, broken giants. Their beautiful facades have been peeled away, revealing interiors filled with smashed furniture and feathers drifting from burst pillows, like a strange, silent snowfall. The streets themselves have vanished, replaced by trenches of rubble and cratered pavement, choked with shattered glass, and the bodies of the fallen, all covered in a uniform grey dust. This is the hellscape that Major Vasiliev's battalion is advancing through. They move through the Prenzlauer Berg district in a staggered formation, each squad desperately hugging whatever cover they can find: a toppled tram, the skeletal remains of a half-collapsed bakery, the burnt frame of a city bus lying on its side like some great dead animal. The air is thick and tastes of chalk and gunpowder. Every breath is dry and scrapes the throat. Leading the charge is a T-34 tank, its turret swiveling back and forth like a watchful, mechanical eye. A soldier named Karlinen stands in the open hatch, his goggles smeared with soot. His voice, raw and strained, barks across the street, "Check the windows. Upper floors first." His words are a lifeline, a desperate attempt to impose order on pure chaos. But in this city, death can come from anywhere. Seconds later, it does. A Panzer-Faust rocket streaks from a second-floor balcony, a fiery tail against the grey backdrop. The explosion slams into the tank's thick front armor with a deafening roar that rattles the very bones of every Soviet soldier nearby. The massive T-34 lurches from the impact, but its armor holds. Almost instantly, its machine gun answers back, opening up in a furious spray of bullets. It stitches a line across the building as stonework until the masonry erupts outward in a cloud of dust. A body tumbles from the balcony, its limbs limp and lifeless, falling to the ruined street below. This is the signal. The infantry surges forward. Vasiliev's men kick in doorways, clearing rooms with a brutal efficiency born of years of war. They toss in grenades, then follow with short, vicious bursts from their PPSH submachine guns. Every staircase is a potential killing zone. Every hallway is an ambush corridor waiting to be sprung. Each step into a dark, unfamiliar room could very well be their last. The fighting is so close, so intimate, that the Soviets begin using captured German grenades, the famous potato mashers, tossing them through holes they've blasted into the walls to clear the next room over without exposing themselves. The German defenders they face are a strange and desperate mix. There are the Wehrmacht regulars, professional soldiers fighting with grim, disciplined resistance. Then there are the SS squads, dug in with a fanatical determination that seems to defy the utter ruin surrounding them. But mixed in with these hardened fighters are naval troops, still in their blue-collared uniforms, thousands of miles from the sea. There are old men of the Volkssturm, wearing medals from a war fought decades ago. And most tragically, there are the Hitler Youth emaciated boys, barely teenagers, gripping rifles far too large and heavy for their small arms. In one shattered apartment, a Soviet squad makes a grim discovery. A teenage German girl is crouched beside her dead father. Her hands are shaking uncontrollably, but she grips a rifle so tightly her knuckles are bone white. She's ready to fight, or perhaps she's just terrified. A veteran Soviet sergeant approaches her slowly. He doesn't raise his weapon. Instead, he gently takes the rifle from her trembling hands and guides her toward the stairwell, toward the rear, away from the fighting. In that moment of strange, silent humanity amidst the carnage, no one says a word. Outside, the city continues to scream. By midday, Vasiliev's battalion reaches a major artery, Schauenhauser Allee. Their advance is halted by a massive barricade made of overturned buses, reinforced with sandbags and steel beams. A black-uniformed SS detachment holds this strong point. They have two MG-42 machine guns, nicknamed Hitler's buzzsaw, and they spit bullets in long, roaring sheets of lead. The entire street becomes a hurricane of ricochets and flying dust. Vasiliev ducks behind the carcass of another tram, the metal ringing as bullets glance off it. He shouts orders over the deafening, ripping chatter of the machine guns. Smoke! Flank left! A moment later, a thick cloud of white smoke blooms across the intersection, obscuring the German position. Under its cover, Soviet sappers combat engineers crawl forward. They have explosives strapped to their chests, a desperate, high-risk tactic. One of them, a private named Leonid Chernov, moves with a calm that seems almost unreal amid the chaos. He reaches the barricade, wedges his explosive charge beneath the chassis of a bus, and sprints back just as a hail of bullets tears through the air where he'd been moments before. The explosion is immense. It lifts the first bus into the air as if it were a child's toy. Debris, a storm of twisted steel and burning rubber rains down. This is the breach they needed. The Soviet infantry pour through the gap, roaring as they scramble over the rubble, their bayonets glinting in the smoky light. The SS defenders fight to the last man. The firefight inside the barricade becomes a close-quarters blur of muzzle flashes, shouts, and the brutal sounds of hand-to-hand combat. When it finally ends, the street falls eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the crackle of spreading fires. While Vasiliev's men fight their way through one street, other Soviet armies are doing the same all over the city, pushing toward the center from all directions. The sound of tank engines echoes through the grand boulevards. Artillery pounds the government district relentlessly. Each shell throws up a geyser of stone and earth that falls like deadly hail on streets already rendered unrecognizable. By evening, Vasiliev's battalion reaches the Spree River, a major natural obstacle. The bridges ahead the widened Ammer, the Molka is still held by German defenders, who fire from concrete bunkers dug into the bridge approaches. At night, powerful searchlights sweep across the river's black, oily surface, catching glimpses of drifting debris and, occasionally, the dark shape of a body floating by. Under the cover of darkness and heavy fire, Soviet engineers rush forward, laying down more smoke screens. Machine gun teams provide suppressing fire, pouring bullets into the German bunkers to keep their heads down. A colossal 152mm howitzer is rolled into position, its massive barrel elevating with a slow, ponderous resolve. When it fires, the blast sends shockwaves across the water, shattering windows for blocks around. The German bunker, hit squarely, collapses in a billow of dust and flame. Across the river, the vast Tiergarten Park looms. But it's no longer a park. It's a twisted, splintered forest of shattered trees and cratered earth. Tank battles rage in the dark beneath the broken branches. Berlin is a battlefield made of stone, fire, and the last remnants of a dying regime. And at its very center, buried deep beneath the ruined Reich Chancellery, the Effer bunker waits. It's a reinforced concrete tomb where the last, desperate commands of the Third Reich are being shouted into a telephone network that is falling silent, one line at a time, 1 hour at a time. The Soviets have finally entered Berlin's heart. The end is no longer days or weeks away. It is now only streets away. April 29 th, 1945. Imagine the government district of Berlin. It's not a city anymore. It's a wasteland, a hellscape of firelit ruins and choking dust. The night sky doesn't show stars. It glows a sickening orange, as if the very horizon is on fire. Artillery flashes from below, turning the clouds into rolling embers that drift slowly over a dying city. The stones of the Reich Chancellery, once polished symbols of a thousand-year empire, now lie cracked and blackened. Grand columns are split in half. The great courtyard is just a basin of shattered masonry, ripped open by hundreds of shells. Through this nightmare, Major Vasiliev's battalion moves along Vostre, their figures dancing in the flickering firelight. Soviet tanks were passed in short, violent bursts, their heavy tracks grinding over discarded helmets, rifles, and the marble fragments of fallen statues. The pavement is a broken, cratered mess, littered with the burnt remains of flags that have turned to ash. The smoke is so thick you can almost chew it. Suddenly, a high-pitched whistle cuts through the chaos, followed by a deafening blast. An 88mm shell explodes against a nearby building, showering the street with a deadly rain of brick fragments. A Soviet corporal is thrown backward by the shockwave, sprawling across the sidewalk. Without a second thought, Major Vasiliev drags him to safety behind a broken fountain, shouting to his radio man over the din, "Tell the armor to push up. We need fire on the upper floors." Karlinen's T-34 tank responds instantly. Its long gun swings toward the source of the enemy fire, the second-story windows of a destroyed ministry building. The tank fires, and the shot tears the entire FAT apart. A cascade of rubble thunders into the street below, burying a nest of German gunners beneath tons of stone. The defenders here are the most determined the Soviets have faced in the entire war. Hardened SS troops, desperate police regiments, and the last, fanatical fragments of the Hitler Youth stand shoulder to shoulder. They fight from behind barricades built from marble slabs and overturned limousines. They fight with a frightening zeal, firing Panzer-Force anti-tank weapons from behind pillars and sniping from the jagged, ruined rooftops. But the Red Army is relentless. It is a force of nature. Soviet sappers, the army's combat engineers, rush forward under the cover of tank fire, their sole purpose to clear paths through the endless debris. Machine gunners set up their weapons behind fallen statues and pulverized walls, sending bright arcs of tracer fire across the burning streets. The smell is unbearable, a sickening cocktail of burning timber, the sharp scent of cordite from the gunfire, and the sickly sweetness of bodies that have been lying in the rubble for far too long. Beyond the Chancellery's shattered courtyard lies the entrance to the F bunker, now half buried under tons of collapsed concrete. From time to time, German officers emerge from the depths, their faces pale and their uniforms filthy. They shout frantic orders before ducking back into the earth. Down there, in that concrete tomb, Adolf Hitler is spending his final hours. He's dictating messages that no one will ever read, commanding armies that no longer exist, and listening to the city above him die in layers of dust and collapsing stone. Up on the surface, Vasilev's men push forward, advancing toward the steps of the new Reich Chancellery through a deadly gauntlet of grenades lobbed from broken windows. From the other side of the courtyard, gunfire erupts. A squad of SS grenadiers sprints behind a barricade, opening fire with their MP-40 submachine guns. Soviet return fire crashes through the broken portico. Bullets chip the stone into a fine, white dust that drifts like a strange, ghostly snowfall through the fiery haze. By dawn, the entire Chancellery complex is surrounded. The ground trembles as Soviet artillery thunders from the nearby Tiergarten Park. Shells hammer the buildings around Wilhelmstrasse, sending huge plumes of debris into the air with every explosion. Each blast feels like the hammering of fate itself, forging the end of an era. Vasilev crouches with his men behind the smoking, twisted shell of a destroyed Kubelwagen. He watches as Karlinen's T-34 rolls forward again, its gun aimed at a reinforced doorway. The tank's main cannon recoils with a deafening boom. The shot echoes down into the underground chambers of the bunker. But down below, the final decision has already been made. Adolf Hitler, fully aware of the collapse above and the complete encirclement of his last defenses, retreated into his private room shortly before midday. A single, sharp report muffled by feet of concrete ends an era soaked in blood. But the Soviets fighting above do not know this yet. For them, the battle continues with the exact same ferocity as if the war's architect was still alive, still giving orders from below. Inside the Chancellery's ruined halls, Soviet soldiers sweep through rooms filled with smashed portraits of their enemy, broken typewriters, and hastily abandoned maps showing front lines that have long since vanished. One room is lit only by the eerie light of fires creeping along the walls. Another is ankle-deep in murky water from ruptured pipes, the surface covered with floating scraps of paper that slowly dissolve into a grey, pulpy mush. With every step they take, they get closer to the bunker's outer access points. Every corridor, every room reeks of the end. The fall of Berlin is no longer a future event or a strategic prediction on a generalist map. It is happening right now, beneath their boots, behind every shattered wall, inside every shaking breath they take. And within hours, the last defenders will be forced out of the darkness of the bunker and into the ruins of the world they helped create. The Third Reich is dying, and its last agonizing breath is echoing through the ruins of its capital. And subscribing to our channel for more stories like this. We'll see you in the next one. May 2nd, 1945. Dawn struggles through a sky still bruised by smoke and drifting ash. Berlin is quiet. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but quiet in a way that feels wrong, like the breath held before a final verdict. The artillery has fallen silent. The only steady sound is the crackling of distant fires, mingling with the groan of collapsing masonry. This is the end. This is the aftermath. Major Vasiliev stands on Wilhelmstrasse, right beside the twisted wreck of a German half-track. Its metal is still warm from yesterday's fighting. His uniform is torn, his face a mask of soot and exhaustion. He's seen hell, and it looks a lot like this city. Then, movement. From the rubble near the ruined Ministry of the Interior, a small group emerges waving makeshift white flags. A German officer steps forward. He has no cap, no weapon, and one arm is held in a crude sling. Behind him, a handful of soldiers, a mix of Waffen SS and Wehrmacht, raise their hands shakily. They look like ghosts, men who clawed their way out from under the earth. The officer's voice is thin, cracked. Berlin capitulates. The words seem to drift through the street like fragile glass, and for a moment, everything hangs in suspension. Soviet soldiers, who for days have known only the thunder of guns, slowly rise from their cover. A few keep their rifles trained, their minds refusing to believe it's over. Others lower their weapons, just blinking at the unfamiliar, deafening stillness. Vasiliev approaches the German officer. Their eyes meet. There's no hatred passing between them. Just a shared, unspoken understanding of how far humanity has fallen. Your men will be treated according to the laws of war, Vasiliev says, his own voice heavy with fatigue. The German officer simply nods, and you can see a wave of relief cut through his exhaustion. Across the sprawling, shattered city, the last pockets of resistance begin to surrender. People emerge from basements flooded with sewage and broken pipes. They crawl out of attics where families had huddled under mattresses as shells tore through the roofs above them. They stumble out from cellars where fanatics had preached death and victory until the very walls collapsed around them. Soviet patrols move with caution, block by block, through a landscape stitched together by grief. On the famous Unter den Linden, the Brandenburg Gate stands like a wounded titan. It's pocked with countless shell holes, its iconic quadriga statue shattered. Abandoned tanks sit silently under its arches, their engines quiet for the first time in weeks. In the vast Tiergarten Park, the trees are skeletal, scorched black, their branches reaching toward the grey sky like pleading hands. The ground is a chaotic tapestry of tank ruts and water-filled shell craters. By the afternoon, a powerful symbol rises above the devastation. A red army flag is hoisted over the Reichstag. Its red fabric snaps in the wind, its edges singed and burned from the ferocious fighting that raged inside the building. Below, Soviet soldiers erupt in cheers. Some raise their rifles in a final, triumphant salute. Others just stare, numb, the reality too immense to process. The building beneath the flag is barely a structure anymore, just fragments of pillars and charred walls. But the symbol, the statement, is absolute. In the city center, a tank commander named Kalinin climbs out of his T-34 for the first time in hours. He sits heavily on the tank's hull, a cigarette trembling between his fingers. His crew joins him, but no one speaks. They don't smile, they just breathe. The simple act of breathing in air that isn't choked with cordite and death feels foreign. Nearby, a group of German civilians gathers cautiously at the edge of the street. They are mostly women, elderly men, and children, the ones left behind. A Soviet medic, his own face grim, begins to distribute food from a dented can. A girl, maybe 12 years old, clutches her younger brother's hand. Their faces are smudged with dust, but their eyes are wide with the fear and confusion of those who have seen far, far too much for their age. The medic kneels beside them and offers a piece of bread. The girl hesitates, her gaze flickering from the soldier to the food. Then, with a trembling hand, she takes it. For just a moment, the war, the politics, the empires, it all fades away. It's just two hungry children eating in the ruins of a world that completely failed them. As the pale afternoon light begins to dim, Major Vasiliev receives the official transmission from Army Command. The voice on the radio is clear, devoid of emotion. Enemy resistance in Berlin has ceased. All units to begin stabilization operations. He lowers the receiver slowly, the words hanging in the air. The battle for Berlin, the final, violent convulsion of a collapsing empire, is officially over. Around him, his soldiers begin the grim, necessary work of peace. Clearing bodies, marking unexploded ordnance, establishing aid stations, and helping the civilians who continue to emerge from the shadows like startled animals. History will record this day as an ending, a victory. But for the men and women who survived it, standing amidst the rubble, it feels more like the aftermath of a storm that erased the entire world they once knew. The echoes of this battle will remain forever in the gouged stone of the Chancellery ruins, in the fire-blackened apartment blocks, and most of all, in the eyes of the soldiers and civilians who now walk among the ghosts. A new world, a new Europe, is about to be born from these ashes. But tonight, Berlin sleeps under the immense, crushing weight of silence, the first true silence of peace in 6 long, bloody years. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing for more journeys into the most pivotal moments of our past. We'll see you next time.